What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. Alright, so I want to go ahead and continue with just my opinion. You don't have to agree with the rankings or who I have in here, but I get requested for stuff like this. Alright, so I want to continue with my top 15 shooting guards of all time. And this is professional basketball, history of professional basketball. So at number 15, I had Tracy McGrady. Number 14, I had Vince Carter. Number 13, I had Klay Thompson. A lot of people had problems with that. You know, it is what it is. My issue is that, or my thing is, Tracy McGrady, Vince Carter's far superior stats were better. I guess you could, better, more dynamic players, create their own shots, great scorers. Klay, to me, better shooter, generally more clutch, played defense, which was not necessarily the strong suit of the other two. Matter of fact, Klay, before the injuries, was one of the better two-way guards in the NBA. Not saying he was Kawhi Leonard, but he's one of the better ones. And four-time NBA champion. I mean, that does count for something, you know. But those were the prior picks. At number 12, I have Reggie Miller. All right? Reggie Miller. When I think of Reggie, I think of one of the great clutch performers of his generation. I think of one of the greatest shooters of his generation. The greatest three-point shooter of his generation from 1998, I think. I know from the 1997-98 season until I think the 2010-11 season. He was the NBA's all-time leader in three-pointers made, 2,560 three-point field goals made in his career. He was a career 39.5% three-point shooter. If you consider the era that he played in, that was an elite figure. Never won a championship. The closest he got was the 2000 NBA Finals when they lost. His Indiana Pacers lost in I think it was 6 to the Los Angeles Lakers. Although the best team I think that he was ever on was the 1998 Pacers. And they barely were denied an NBA Finals appearance by the 98 Bulls, who barely outlasted them in 7 games. Reggie was... I think Reggie made a name for himself probably in the post-Jordan era, the first post-Jordan era. There was a hole in the NBA as far as dynamic guards when Jordan retired. Don't get me wrong, there were a lot of great guards at that time, but as far as a personality, someone who can, someone who could evoke emotions from the crowd, you know, we really didn't have that in that shooting guard position when Jordan retired. But Reggie Miller filled that void, especially when it came to the New York Knicks. I think the Knicks thought once Jordan retired, it was going to be smooth sailing for them to win a championship or go to the finals. But Reggie Miller said, it wasn't going to be so easy. And he's had his greatest moments against the New York Knicks. But you know what's funny? When Reggie Miller was drafted, even though he's beloved by Pacers fans now, the greatest legend in NBA history for the Pacers, NBA history. But there are some other players, of course, when you go back to their ABA history that, challenge him. Because I think the greatest Pacers player ever was actually the Roger Roger Brown. And I think Reggie Miller would say that too. And also Mel Daniels, George McGinnis, to others. But in the NBA, it's Reggie. But anyway, the point I was going to make is he was actually booed when he was drafted by the Pacers in 1987 out of UCLA. He was booed. The Pacers faithful wanted, I think his name was Steve Buford. I think that was his name. I might have the wrong first name, but I think it was Steve. I think they wanted Steve Buford, who of course went to Indiana, the Hoosiers, and was a great player for them for many years in college. They wanted him instead of Reggie. But ultimately, the Pacers made the right choices. I think Buford only played maybe 3 years tops before he was out of the league. Reggie Miller went on to play 18 seasons in the NBA, scored 25,279 points. Now, some of the detractors with Reggie will tell you, he wasn't a big-time scorer. His stats didn't impress you, For his career, he had 25,279 points, grabbed 4,182 rebounds, and dished 4,141 assists, which were career averages of 18.2 points, 3 rebounds, and 3 assists per game. But you got to remember, Reggie's role on the team was really to score. It wasn't to play make. It wasn't to rebound. It was to score. And Reggie was not, although he could create his own shot, that was not his forte. Reggie pretty much used screens and picks to get most of his points. And back in those days, it wasn't as easy to score, you know what I'm saying? It wasn't as easy to score. You could still hand check until the 1990s, even though it was a 1979 rule that was supposed to get rid of it, but it took another 16 years for them to really get rid of it. And even then after that, there was another decade where you still could be physical, use your elbows, use your shoulder to bump into guys, use your hips. You could still be physical until they got rid of all of that in the mid-2000s. And even in that era, the Pacers were a low-scoring team. They were never a team that was high-octane. So when you take that into account, even though Reggie only averaged 18 points a game, I think his highest scoring average for a season was like 24. In today's NBA, I could easily see Reggie averaging 24, 25, 26, possibly even more than that, just because of how easy it is to score. And he also didn't have, for much of his career, the benefit of playing with another great scorer or great, he never played in his prime with another guy who was great at creating his own shot, so to speak. Now, he did have Chuck Person, but I'm talking about a guy that could handle the basketball and create his own shot one-on-one with great efficiency and creativity and great regularity. He didn't really have that. So for him to put up those numbers and for those Pacers team to be that good, it worked. His team basically consisted of him being the offensive guy. The best teams were Mark Jackson was the setup guy who could occasionally score, and you had a team of defenders, scrappers, and enforcers and rebounders, and other guys that could chip out with scoring, but Reggie was their main guy. And then you also had some guys on the bench that could score, Ricky Pierce and all of that. And they were a really good team starting in the mid-'90s going into the late 90s. Now, I don't want to look at Reggie Miller's resume. He was a 5-time NBA All-Star, 3-time All-NBA third team. In 1993-94, he was a member of the rare 50-40-90 club. For his career, Reggie Miller was, I think, an 88.8% career free throw shooter. Let me look at it right quick. For his career, Reggie Miller was an 88.8% career free throw shooter. And he led the NBA in free throw percentage, not once, not twice, not thrice, not even 4 times, but 5 times in his NBA career. In 90-91, he led the NBA in free throw percentage with a 91.8% percentage. In 1998-99, the abbreviated season, he shot 91.5% leading the NBA. In 2000-2001, he led the NBA. This was his best year at the time. Actually, it's his second best overall percentage, 92.8%. The very next year, he led the NBA in free throw percentage, 91.1%. And then his final year in the NBA, 2004-2005, he shot 93.3% from the charity stripe. This is when I debunked something that Chris Broussard said. Remember when LeBron was in his 18th season, and they said that LeBron is the only player in his 18th season to lead the NBA in a major category, and then I did a video saying that's not true. Reggie Miller led the NBA in free throw percentage his last year, and then the next show or the day after that, they said, well, we did find out that Reggie Miller. No, nigga, you heard it. I said that shit. But anyway, during Reggie Miller's prime, which was 1989 to probably around 2000, 2001, during those years, he averaged 20.6 points per game, 3.2 rebounds, 3.2 assists, 1.2 steals, shot 47.6% from the floor during that time period, 40.2% from three-point range, and 88.9% from the charity stripe. For his career, he was a 47.1% career shooter, and I already said the other percentages. He grew up, of course, in California. He was born in 1965, Riverside. He attended Riverside High School. And unfortunately, when Reggie was born with hip deformities, which prevented him from walking correctly. And after a few years of continuously wearing braces on both legs, his leg strength grew enough to compensate. And of course, he is the younger brother of basketball legend Cheryl Miller, who is the greatest female basketball player ever. I don't care what nobody says. In my opinion, Cheryl Miller is the greatest female basketball player ever. If there was a WNBA back in the 80s, she would have been putting up numbers that they would still be chasing today in that league. Just looking at some of this stuff. Cheryl Miller, after her career, became... she was a Hall of Fame basketball player. She became an analyst for Turner Sports. One of the family anecdotes Reggie likes to recall was Cheryl used to beat him in games of one-on-one prior to his professional career. According to Reggie, they quit playing when he could finally block Cheryl's shots. Miller says his unorthodox shooting style was developed to arc his shot over his sister's constant shot blocking. And that's one thing, too. Basketball purists hated Reggie Miller's shooting form. It wasn't textbook, you know what I'm saying? Most players you can think of, they have a textbook way of shooting. You know, the Mark Prices. And, I'm trying to think of other guys that had textbook releases. Maybe like Stojakovic, I guess. There's a lot of other guys, Larry Bird, even though he's a little bit slightly off kilter because of the fingers. But, he didn't have a textbook release. But it went in. So, people always saying, oh, his shot's so ugly. I'm like, who cares? Who cares if his shot isn't textbook if it goes in? Who cares? Who cares? So anyway, Miller attended University of California, UCLA, where he received a degree in history. In the 84-85 season, he led the UCLA Bruins to an NIT championship. And I already said the collegiate stuff. The three-point field goal was added during the 86-87 season. 69 of Miller's 247 field goals that year were three-pointers. And anyway, as I said, Miller was selected in the 1987 NBA draft, the 11th pick, and he was chosen over Indiana native Steve Alford, and he was booed at the time, but and Miller had some growing pains earlier on, but he hit his stride going into his second year, and in 1990-91, the Pacers had a memorable series against the Boston Celtics. I think it was in the first round, I believe, which I think the Celtics won that in 5. But early on it was more perceived as Chuck Person's team. But once Chuck Person was traded during the 92 offseason, it pretty much was established that it was Reggie Miller's team. And I also forgot to mention, when I was talking about the Pacers team, they also had a great scoring big man in Rick Smits. So I forgot to mention that. But anyway, in the 1992-93 season, Reggie Miller set a career high, scoring 57 points against the Charlotte Hornets. And I believe that still stands as the Pacers team record. I think the only guy that come close to that, off the top of my head, was Jermaine O'Neal. Several years later, scored 55 points in the game. Another player who could have been a Hall of Famer if it wasn't for injuries. It was after Michael Jordan's retirement, starting in the 1994 season, when Reggie Miller started becoming a household name. He had some phenomenal performances. First one that comes to mind is the 1993-94 season in the playoffs, Game 5 of the Eastern Conference Finals, June 1st, 1994, when Reggie Miller, after having a slow start with just 14 points in 3 quarters, scored 25 points in the fourth quarter. I think he hit like 5 threes in that quarter or something like that, or 4 threes, to engineer a comeback for the Pacers at Madison Square Garden. And then the next year, it was in Game 1 of the Eastern Conference semifinals when Reggie Miller single-handedly, scoring 8 unanswered points, brung the Pacers back against the Knicks in that game to win. And it happened with like 18.7 seconds left, and the Pacers trailing 105-99. I think anybody that remembers that series remembers how great that moment was. Over the next couple of years, Reggie Miller would continue to be one of the best players and have great moments. Reggie was one of the few people who could get under the skin of Michael Jordan. In 1992-93, there was an infamous brouhaha fight between those two. I think it was Game 4 during that 1998 series I referenced, when Reggie Miller hit what was essentially what happened to be the game-winning shot. Even though he had a sprained ankle, he hit that shot while he nudged Michael Jordan. As a Bulls fan, I think it should have been an offensive foul, but whatever. He nudged Jordan and hit one of the biggest shots in the history of the Indiana Pacers. Because had he not hit that shot, I believe the Bulls probably would have went up 3-1. So, Reggie was instrumental in that series, especially the first few games. Well, I think he got cold the next several games into Game 7. As Reggie Miller got older, past 2000, past the finals, he was still a great player, phenomenal skill. His speed started diminishing. Shot attempts went down. As he got older, he started deferring more and more to Jermaine O'Neal, who should have been a Hall of Fame caliber player. And the Pacers remained a really good team for quite some time. And to me, I've always maintained that if it wasn't for the malice at the Palace, Reggie Miller had a really good shot at winning a championship and riding off into the sunset. But that incident destroyed that team. Ron Artest was having like a career year, I think. I know it was early, but Ron Artest was having a career year. You had the other guys. Steven Jackson was in his prime, young. I think that just ruined that team. Reggie Miller retired after the 2004-2005 season. And after his retirement, Reggie Miller became an analyst. And to this day, he's still an analyst, although sometimes he says some stupid things. In Reggie Miller's second year of eligibility, not his first year, but his second year of eligibility, he was voted into the Hall of Fame. And even though he never won a championship, he's one of the great shooting guards, one of the great clutch performers that I think the game has ever seen. Tell me what you guys think.